One fact of automotive history that many may not know is that Buick actually introduced the first ever concept car, the Y Job as it was called, in 1938, which you see here. With its fine textured, vertically oriented grille as well as 4 fender forms and Art Deco strakes on the sides of the body, the Y Job would telegraph Buick's key styling elements for a number of years to come, and was a particularly handsome vehicle back in the day and remains. By the way, the individual seated in the Y Job here is GM's then styling chief, Harley Earl, who led General Motors design through the late 1950s. And as time passed, Buick introduced a number of concept cars over the years and various show cars. Shown here is the 1953 Buick Wildcat, the first time that Buick would employ the Wildcat name. It's obviously a two-door convertible, pretty handsome vehicle with some interesting hood scoops on the front, as well as the pointy bumpers that were pretty typical of Cadillac during the period. Out back, the Wildcat was even more provocative with tail lamps that effectively formed the tops of the rear quarter panels, something that vehicles really wouldn't be doing for a number of years into the future until the 1963 Oldsmobile 98 rear end, and also had some, shall we call it, interesting surfacing on the deck lid. So this Wildcat show car certainly made a splash for 1953. The Wildcat nameplate really wasn't used by Buick until 10 years later when it was introduced as a vehicle for 1963 as part of the Buick lineup. The Wildcat name really wouldn't last all that long. 1970 would be its final year before it was sunset in favor of the Buick Centurion, which would be introduced for the 1971 model year when Buick redid its entire full-size lineup. It would then take until 1985 when Buick would revive the Wildcat name yet again for this particular vehicle, a mid-engine concept car that was introduced at the 1985 Las Vegas SEMA show. A mid-engine concept car that looks like this, you say? That's a Buick? Well, it certainly wasn't a Buick in the form language of what was in the showroom for Buick at the time. But yes, this was a Buick division car that was produced as a concept car for that model year in 1985. The dramatic proportions and styling language shown on the Buick Wildcat would be far different from what Buick had done previously. In fact, this particular concept car was designed to be a mid-engine vehicle with a 3.8-liter double overhead cam, 230 horsepower Buick V6 powering all 4 wheels through an all-wheel drive system and a 4-speed automatic transmission. Overall, the Wildcat was designed to really spark some interest amongst potential Buick buyers that were generally far younger than the customers that were entering its showroom. And it certainly did generate considerable interest when it went around the auto show circuit in 1985. Personally, I think that this 1985 Buick Wildcat is arguably one of the most daring and forward-looking vehicles that Buick has ever done from a concept car or production standpoint. And the good news for you as the viewer is that we're going to sit down with the designer of the Buick Wildcat, at least the Buick Wildcat as it was in the Buick One studio, before it was shipped to the Advanced Studios to make the final car. That designer is Dave Rand, who spent time not only in Buick studio, but numerous General Motors studios in the U.S. as well as Brazil. Dave sat down with us to discuss the Buick Wildcat concept and shared with us some of his original artwork for the vehicle as well as pictures of the scale model. If you enjoy Dave's comments here, be sure to check out his column in AutoWig where he's reviewed many different new designs, including the Tesla Cybertruck as well as the Toyota Prius. Let's welcome Dave to the show and listen in. Well, welcome back to Rare Classic Cars, and part of our Interviews with Designers series, we have, should I say a friend of the program, Dave?
You can say a friend.
I can say a friend. Right. I've graduated from acquaintance now to friend.
Right.
Wow, that says a lot.
It does.
Wow. Well, we have Dave Rand here, not part of the Research and Development Corporation, but
True. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. But Dave spent over 30 years with General Motors, culminating in an assignment as Executive Director in charge of Advanced Studios, where you led 5 different studios around the globe with respect to advanced design. And even before that, I have to say, Dave was Executive Director in charge of global interiors back when GM was really trying to lean into better interiors, like the second generation CTS as an example.
Well, to be accurate, it's really more North American interiors, not global.
North American. Well, I think the good news is that most people remember the My First Interior by Hasbro, and then what it became. So Dave had a great hand in that. But before, you spent time in Brazil and even designed, quite a few various vehicles, or at least had a part in them. Everything from the Bowles Calais to the '88 Cutlass Supreme, um, to some of the early Pontiacs of the early '90s, the Bonneville SSEI, the Firebird, the Sunfire Concept.
Mhm.
So quite a portfolio, and then even spent time, I think, in every division for GM, at least domestically. Fair?
I think over the years I spent with GM, I worked with every brand. Yeah,
Even Saturn.
even Saturn. For those of us who remember Saturn, yeah,
So, but we're here to talk today about some work that Dave really participated in and led for, I would say, one of the most captivating Buick show cars that really was ever done. Buick, of course, being one would argue almost the initiator of concept cars with the Y job
right.
in the late '30s. But this is one of those cars that you look at it, particularly from a concept standpoint, and you say, that's a Buick. Um, the 1985 Wildcat concept car. So maybe Dave, just tell us a little bit about, I mean, it's amazing to think this came out of the production studio for Buick that was really doing things like Electras and LeSabres.
Right, right.
And so here you have, those vehicles. Now go to a mid-engine sporty vehicle. What was a bit of the conversation like there?
Um, it was obviously not a typical Buick. It was initially a Center for Creative Studies project, a student project,
Hmm.
and it was brought into the Buick production studios with the summer interns at that time. And that's about the point when I came into the studio thinking that I was going to be designing um, big, uh, old Buicks.
And you were thrilled.
And I was really thrilled about that. No, I was not looking forward to that. And I, I was a pretty young designer, and I wanted to design, obviously, like most young designers, more aggressive, sporty, more interesting things than big Buick sedans. So when I came into the studio, this project was going on, and the head of the studio was Bill Porter, and Steve Pasliner was the assistant, and they were a great team. They were great people to work with. So with those guys and with
Hmm.
this project, it turned out that I wasn't in the Buick studio that I had envisioned. I was in heaven.
Maybe
So
for the viewer too. So Bill Porter, as Dave said, was in charge of the Buick One studio during this time. But Bill had previously designed the '68 GTO, the '70 GTO, was leading Pontiac studio during that era, the '70 and a half Firebird. So some really sporty,
terrific cars. Yeah.
terrific cars. So that's who was in charge of design for the Buick One studio that you were working with.
Right. Right.
Wow. And so I just can't imagine how this conversation starts. Gosh, it's a Buick. Maybe it's probably in part they saw that their customer base was aging a bit and they wanted to get some youthful flair in.
Right.
And what better way than with a concept car that kind of shows a little bit of the future for them?
And it was a slightly odd way of doing a concept car in the fact that PPG was sponsoring this concept, whereas most of the concepts that GM was doing and had done were internal, and they paid for it. From the beginning, PPG was a partner in the car.
And you were thrilled that the decal made it on the
Yeah,
bottom of the.
I had mentioned that. Yeah, the final version of the car had this big PPG decal stuck on it, like a big poster, um, which
Yeah. I think that's it. Yeah.
yeah, not great.
Not great.
Yeah.
Well, Dave thankfully brought some of his original sketches and also some photos. We have sketches, and then usually, and Dave obviously is the expert here, but there's the sketches, and then that goes into the tape drawing, basically kind of put it up on the wall for everybody to see, and
Right, full-size tape drawing.
full-size tape drawing.
Yeah.
And then scale models are constructed. So, it's relatively small. What about this big, would you say? Scale?
This
Okay.
big.
Okay. I'll take your judgment of it.
Okay.
And then full size. Then you get to the full size,
That's
basically.
right. That's right.
So we have a little bit of his original artwork on the sketches, the tape drawing, and some pictures of the scale model here as well. That Dave, would be great for you just to talk the viewer through what you were thinking and on these and how they kind of came about.
Sure. And these are some of the really initial sketches that were done for the concept. I think this top one shows the mid-engine configuration, and it's also the drive shaft here indicating that it was going to be an all-wheel drive concept.
And it was in the end too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that Buick was trying to do was highlight their V6 engine, and that really was one of the core items for the theme of the car. And these sketches demonstrate trying to deal with how to incorporate the engine because it was going to be exposed, and also get the body to address the size of the engine and to kind of hug it almost like a motorcycle. So these sketches are just pencil sketches, very initial thoughts, very quick. And here you can see some of the exposed exhaust outlets. Again, like a motorcycle here as well. Trying to come to grips with the proportions of the car and the engine at the same time.
Was that part of the thought process that you kind of had, the car has a bit of this wasp waist so that you could almost make the engine look bigger with respect to the body on at that portion of the car?
Exactly that, because the car was relatively wide, and the engine, being a V6, was not a huge engine. So trying to adjust the proportions of the car and get the engine to be a significant element of the design was kind of driving the Wasp Waist approach.
It's interesting too because you can start to see even in these early sketches, one of the things, knowing I would say a bit of Dave's artwork, it's almost like the shape is the theme here for these vehicles. It's just a seamless transition from some of the, it has the glass to the sheet metal, et cetera, around it.
Well, you said it better than I could. That's nice, yeah.
Which I think you see on some of the other work that you've done over the years too, including the Sunfire concept or some other vehicles that maybe we'll show at a different point in time.
So here, side view study. One of the things that I was trying to do initially was to have a kind of a compartment for the engine and a separate compartment for the driver and passenger. So in this sketch, you can see this one pod here and another section here trying to address the engine. This, again, very preliminary, very early sketch. And these are really more thought sketches than anything else.
Just this two-pod kind of theme here.
Right.
Got it.
And another sketch that showing some of the exposed engine. How do you expose the engine? Is it on top? Is it someplace else in the side view? Again, given the size of the engine, the side view exposure was going to be very difficult. But here you can see some of the initial integration of the upper with the lower. And again, you can see the one pod coming through in that sketch as well.
It's interesting because it's so antithetical to the proportions of, the rear wheel drive cars that were kind of in the showroom at the time. It's not a dash to axle car. It's almost a inverse, with.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a super cab forward proportion on these.
Right. Well, remember at that time that GM was, I don't think the Fiero had come out. The Fiero was in '84. It actually was, that was around the same time. That was the first mid-engine car GM had done. And as designers, we had been kind of experimenting with what is a mid-engine proportion. I wouldn't say the Fiero was a good example of a mid-engine proportion.
Yeah, it could have been. It could have been a front engine.
It could have, right. It really didn't show, at least in its proportions, so much where the engine was located. Whereas this car, which was basically a display for the engine, really wanted to embrace that mid-engine location and that mid-engine proportion.
This one's one of my favorites for a few reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
It's got some Buick flair to it, I guess.
You want to tell them why?
It's got a little boat tail,
Yes,
on it.
yes.
You were clearly inspired by the 71-3 Riviera with this, right?
No, but that's one take on it, I suppose. The yeah, I think one of the things this sketch does show is the difficulty of embracing the engine without making it look like it was just you cut a hole in the car proportion, because the engine is exposed here, but it seems like a very secondary consideration. Whereas again, the primary purpose of the car was to display the engine. One of the interesting things here is the canopy is kind of, it drips over the body side. In a lot of the sketches, it's more torpedo shaped. Here, it kind of embraces the oval contour of the car and comes down below the natural belt line here. Not that you could actually do that.
I was going to ask you, how would you form that glass?
Right,
you know?
not easily.
That would be a cheap windshield repair, probably.
Yeah, it's much easier to realize in pencil than it is in 3 dimensions. This one also has the canopy dripping down on the body side a little bit here. And the way it's cut out is a little different than, well, it's quite a bit different than what we finally realized. But this one was also trying in a different way to expose part of the engine where you don't see the full engine in the rear, but just portions of it. And, from that perspective, it probably wasn't that successful in telegraphing the engine component.
And these are kind of air intakes here.
Right, the streaks on the side. Yeah, it was a device for air intake. It was also a graphic device to kind of break up this form here, which, to your point earlier, could get heavy.
I think this one I do like because the back end tapers too, so you don't have the big rear end either. It could tend to get pretty large in the rear, but this one has a nice tapering to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But one thing we should mention is, all these sketches, these were done in 1984.
So during that time period when power was king, and you got in your vehicle and it just felt like it had tremendous horsepower.
Yeah.
Although this was a double overhead cam, 230 horsepower, 3.8 V6.
This sketch really doesn't show much exposure of the engine, but it does demonstrate the kind of Wasp Waist approach that the scale model took on. And here is a fairly simple canopy torpedo shaped. The other thing that I kept showing, and I think that is something I kept playing with, was the integration of the tire and wheel to the body. I'm showing contour lines and shading here right through the wheels as if it were one. And I wanted that look, the wheels being very integrated into the body, that so it looks like one complete continuous form. Obviously, you can't do it. It's not realistic. But that's what the sketches were trying to show.
Now this one I really love because it's probably the most dramatic wasp-waisted one with also the two-pod design on here.
Yeah, and it also is fairly indicative of where the scale model was going. So it shows the two pods. It's very much wasp-waisted. And I thought it was relatively successful in embracing the engine and also showing the engine well. So I was kind of checking the boxes about, making it a good engine display.
We should probably explain for the view. Wasp waist just means it's larger up at front, then kind of narrows in the midsection, and it gets wider at the rear, like a wasp.
Well, from plan view, yeah, it's that's wasp waisted. Yeah.
I love that one too. That's an ultra cab forward design there.
Very much so. Yeah, right.
You're sitting out over front of the front wheel.
Right. Again, it's much easier to do in pencil than it is to realize in 3 dimensions or to make it run.
You just live in that dream world, Dave, right?
Well, that's that's your opinion. This one was again trying to do the two components for the design, and it's probably the more literal of the sketches, where there is clearly one section for the driver and passenger, and the rear being very much a separate element here.
Now here we have the tape drawing for the vehicle. And yeah, tell us a little bit about this. So this is after the sketches.
Right.
This is the next step.
Exactly. So the process was, and I think what I did at the time was take a number of these sketches and nail them up to the 20-foot board that we use for full-size side views. And from those sketches, and taking elements and bits and pieces from each one, I came up with this tape drawing. And if you look at the tape drawing, it's very much a study in ellipses. And you can see the canopy and the forward portion is an ellipse, and the rear portion is ellipse as well. And this also was trying to reinforce the two-part approach, but in just a side view with tape, it's a little less easy to show. Versus, where you can do perspectives.
And here you have, like you said, which the scale model has too, the ellipses for the doors, which
Right.
the final car had that full canopy that
That's
opened
right.
and lost that element.
Yeah, I initially, and again, a way to reinforce the ellipses, envisioned a scissor door that would just swing up like a Countach. And unfortunately, the final model, the final car went away from that. But the tape drawing was really the first thing that generated a lot of excitement with management. And so once I established that, I was allowed to take it into a scale model.
Got it. So this is the sketches are made, then this full size. This would be a full size tape drawing up on a wall, kind of life size with respect to the package, pretty much. Fair?
Yeah.
And then the next step would be the scale models of the vehicle, and have a few photos of the scale models here.
Yeah. So this is the initial model without any dynoc to show painted surfaces or whatever. At this point, it was working out the proportions, trying to get the essence of the full size. And here again, I'm showing plain wheels here in an attempt to continue the body through the wheel theme. But the scale, I think, successfully shows the two-part approach. And you can see that also it's the scissor doors delineated here. So a lot of the elements that were on the tape drawing were telegraphed onto the scale.
So that's an interesting, and I love this is with it being dynocked then here.
That's right.
So there's basically a film that gets stretched over the clay to make it look like it's painted and it has glass.
Yeah, that's right.
Imagine this in the context of 1984 and where's the formal backlight here, Dave?
Yeah. Well,
Egg crate grill. Where's the egg crate grill?
We had a visit from the general manager of Buick at one point, looking over these projects, and I believe it was Hackworth at the time, and they showed him the scale model, and I remember the expression on his face, and his eyes kind of went up, and the only thing I could figure out is it was fear.
How is our existing buyer going to react to this?
Yeah, so it was certainly not the reaction we had expected, but it didn't stop the project from going forward.
I do love you've nicely integrated, I guess that's an air extractor here.
Yeah.
Almost helps make the engine look bigger, or that area bigger.
Well, again, trying to graphically make it an integrated part of the car, and also expand what was not the biggest engine in the world.
And now these are done after or close to, maybe during the scale model's development.
That's right. And this sketch, I think, also was trying to depict the engine graphics, the overall shape of the car, the breakup of how the door works. It was, in a sense, uh, uh, I think, more of a tool for me to kind of walk around the car,
Hmm.
to understand the elements as the model was being developed.
Interesting. It's pretty close to the scale
Yeah, I
model.
think it is.
Now, this one I liked because it has an interesting location for the headlamps, which, what were you thinking there, Dave?
Well, because of what I just said about the front graphics and the rear graphics being secondary, Bill Porter at one point said, "Dave, you got to put some front graphics on the car." And this was an attempt to look at how we could integrate headlights, but not in a normal way.
Hmm.
So the headlights depicted here are just below the cowl and showing a very, very simple air intake. uh, I wanted the form to be fairly pure, and this was a way, I guess, in a sense, to avoid breaking it up too much with headlights in a typical place.
And then how about this?
And so this sketch was done, I think, pretty much uh, near the completion of the scale model. And here it was, I think, for the most part, trying to do a sketch that was, one step beyond a quick pencil thought sketch, and also exploring, what's the best way of breaking
Hmm.
up the engine compartment so that here again, it looks integral to the car, but it is given enough importance graphically.
Yeah, I love it. Really, it's a prescient sketch for, I would say, at least from my perspective. Please correct me if you think I'm wrong, but for some of the vehicles that you do over the next 10 years or so, in terms of that shape being the theme, and really that um, kind of smooth, seamless transition across all the various forms of material that are used,
Hmm.
and being one shape, whether that's the 90, Sunfire Concept, or the 93 Firebird. It kind of has a little bit of, at least for me, it has that aesthetic to it. So,
Yeah, I can understand you saying that. Um, from my perspective as a designer, it was trying to do a very fluid, organic, continuous form. Um, and to your point, and you're not the first one to make it, a number of people have pointed out, that's the type of form, that's the type of car that appeals to me.
so this car, so you finished the scale model, and then this had an interesting gestation because it
Yeah,
started in a production studio, then went to an advanced studio to finish out,
that's
right?
right.
Ahead
That's
of the
right.
1985 SEMA show in Las Vegas, where you went with Bill Porter to display the vehicle.
Right. So at the time of completion of the model, it was decided that the continuation, the further development of the model, it would go down to the advanced studio run by Kip Wysenko at the time. And Chuck Jordan, who was the director of design at the time, gave me a choice. He said, you can stay here and work on the project you're currently working on, which was a small sedan, somewhat inspired by the Wildcat, or you can go down and work with Kip to finalize the the vehicle. And again, I was a very happy camper in Buick at that time, so I decided,
Mm.
I'll stay where I am.
You liked the management team that was there with Bill and Steve.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great environment. It allowed me to do cars that, here again, without making too big a point of it, were not Buicks.
Any regrets on this car at all, or the final version, or that you would have done differently, or wish had been done differently, or what are your thoughts?
Well, um, if you ask any designer that owns the scale model and is you know very involved with their design, when it's handed off, it there's always something that they'll object to. Kiposenko is a very fine designer, and he did a good job on that car. There are a number of things that I regret that didn't translate from the scale to the full size. I think in profile, the Canopy is not what I would have liked, but then again, the Canopy may not have been realistic given the actual packaging that they had to work with. And I would have liked to have seen the two-pod approach that I have kept talking about, more visible on the final car as well.
Got it. Well, there's always, different interpretations, and I think it's great that everybody got to see the scale model and how really the car started. And regardless, at the end of the day, when it came out, I think it really made a statement. And I actually remember seeing it at the auto show and thinking, kind of like what you said, that's interesting. Is that a Buick?
Yeah.
And I think that was the intent, but probably it was a challenge for management to figure, well, where do we go with this given the customer base? But
Right.
I think they were just having trouble trying to figure out how do we pull the trigger here on changing our overall styling. But was arguably successful. I think some of the most successful Buicks are that, by the way, you also worked on the 91 Park Avenue as an example. That was a home run for Buick that I think kind of bridged that gap a little bit into the next round beyond the three-box design.
Well, the Wildcat was really designed to grab attention. It was a concept car, and being a concept car, there was no promise of seeing one in production. But if for that reason alone, it was successful in that it got good press, it got a lot of attention. In fact, we're still talking about it now.
That's right. That's a good note to end on, probably. So, well, thanks, Dave, and thank you for watching. Hopefully, this was another great example of a bit of the knowledge that you get to see firsthand behind the scenes by somebody who worked at GM for over 30 years. And thankfully, I would say, Dave, I love this car, but I think one of your finest accomplishments, maybe we could talk about a different time, is taking GM's interiors from what they were to what they became, under your tenure. It was a dramatic difference.
Thank you for another video.
Yeah. And I'm sure that none of that, by the way, the interiors and the materials they were used, I don't think, by the way, for the viewer, any designer wanted those materials selected historically. That was probably the fault of some other group of individuals who shall go unnamed.
I can honestly say I had nothing to do with that.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, thank you, Dave, again, and thanks again for watching. Thanks for watching this segment on the 1985 Buick Wildcat Concept. If you enjoyed it, be sure to drop a comment below and say thanks to Dave. And also check out his column in Auto Week.